A few years ago, a picture of a receipt started circulating online. It showed a combo meal from a well-known burger chain, ordered at a highway rest stop, ringing up at nearly $18. People were stunned. This was supposed to be cheap food. The whole point of fast food was that it was fast, filling, and affordable. The image spread quickly. The company issued a public response defending its pricing, and for a while, "Fast food is too expensive now," became one of those rare complaints that crossed every political and generational line. Almost everyone, it seemed, had felt at the drive-thru. But a single viral receipt is just an anecdote. The real story is bigger and more interesting than one overpriced burger. Over the last decade, the price of eating at fast food chains has risen faster than overall inflation, faster than groceries, and even faster than prices at regular sit-down restaurants. The industry that built its entire identity around being the budget option has, in many cases, stopped being the budget option. To understand why, you have to look past the easy explanations, rising beef prices, higher wages, inflation, and look at how the business of fast food itself has fundamentally changed. Ask any fast food executive why prices went up, and you'll get a fairly consistent answer. Costs went up everywhere. Beef got more expensive. Cooking oil got more expensive. Cardboard packaging, paper bags, plastic cups, all more expensive. Labor costs rose sharply after the pandemic, and several states raised minimum wages specifically for fast food workers, in some cases pushing starting pay above $20 an hour. Add in higher rents, higher delivery fees, and higher costs for everything from napkins to network internet at the drive-thru speaker box, and a price increase looks less like greed and more like simple math. This explanation isn't wrong. Input costs really did rise across the board, and any business that didn't pass at least some of that along would have struggled to survive. But this explanation is incomplete, and incompleteness is doing a lot of work here. Rising costs explain a price increase. They don't fully explain why fast food's price increases consistently outpace increases at full-service restaurants, where labor and ingredient costs rose just as much, if not more, but menu prices didn't climb nearly as fast. If costs alone explained everything, you'd expect a much more even rise across the entire restaurant industry. Instead, the cheapest tier of dining got disproportionately more expensive. That gap is a real mystery, and it has less to do with what fast food companies are forced to do, and more to do with what they've chosen to do. To see the difference between forced costs and chosen strategy, it helps to compare two competitors selling almost the same product. Picture two burger chains. One of them a sprawling global franchise with thousands of locations. The other a smaller, privately held regional chain known for a stripped-down menu and a cult following. Both sell a roughly comparable burger for a roughly comparable price. But everything else about how they operate is different. The smaller chain owns most of its real estate outright, instead of leasing out to franchisees. It runs its own meat processing and trucking, cutting out middlemen. It buys its buns, produce, and packaging from the same small number of suppliers it has worked with for decades, locking in consistency and predictable costs. Crucially, it pays its staff significantly more than the industry standard and keeps more employees on shift at any given time. Even though that means higher labor costs per location, the result is a slower-moving, smaller company by design. It has a few hundred locations in its home region instead of thousands nationwide, and it has no interest in growing as fast as possible. Despite higher labor costs, despite being open fewer hours per day than its giant competitor, this smaller chain consistently pulls in more annual revenue per location because customers are willing to wait in long lines for a product they trust to be fresh, consistent, and fairly priced. Compare that to the much larger competitor, which operates on an almost entirely different model. The vast majority of its locations are run by independent franchise owners, not the parent corporation itself. Those franchisees lease their property, often from the parent company, and absorb regional cost differences on their own. The parent corporation's real money increasingly comes not from flipping burgers, but from collecting rent and royalties, and more, from data, advertising, and technology licensing. Pricing isn't standardized nationally. It varies wildly from one zip code to the next, and increasingly, from one customer's app account to the next. This isn't a story about one company being good and the other being bad. It's a story about two fundamentally different theories of how to make money selling cheap food. One theory says, Control quality and consistency tightly, charge a fair price, and trust that volume and loyalty will follow. The other theory says, optimize every transaction individually, extract maximum value from each customer interaction, and treat pricing as a flexible lever rather than a fixed promise. If you want to understand why fast food got more expensive, you have to understand that the biggest chains spent the last decade quietly transforming themselves into technology and data companies that happen to sell burgers and fries on the side. It started innocently enough. Major chains noticed customers wanted convenience, shorter lines, faster service, more control over ordering. So they invested heavily in mobile apps, self-order kiosks, and digital drive-through menus. On the surface, this looked like a customer-friendly upgrade. Underneath, it was something much more powerful, a way to collect enormous amount of individual purchasing data and use that data to fine-tune pricing and promotions at a granular level that was never possible when a cashier simply rang up whatever you said out loud. One of the most significant moves in this direction was a major acquisition of a personalization and data analytics company by one of the largest chains in the world, intended specifically to power smart digital menu boards. These boards don't show every customer the same menu. They show different items, different combos, and different prices depending on the time of day, the weather, local sales trends, and even the customer's order history if they're logged into a loyalty account. A regular customer who always orders a specific sandwich might see that sandwich pushed harder, sometimes bundled into a slightly more expensive combo by default. A first-time visitor might see splashy promotions for new high-margin items like specialty drinks or limited-time snacks instead of the plain, cheap basics that built the brand's reputation in the first place. This is a part that rarely makes the headlines. When you walk up to a kiosk or open the app instead of talking to a cashier, you are not just placing an order faster. You are interacting with a finely tuned sales system designed to nudge you toward higher margin purchases, all while the company collects data on exactly how much you, specifically, are willing to spend before you bulk. There's a quieter trick at play too, one that doesn't require fancy algorithms at all, simply making the cheap stuff harder to find. Walk up to many digital ordering kiosks today, and the default screen won't show you individual menu items with individual prices. It will show you meals and combos, bundled at a higher price point than the items would cost separately. Want to know if you can just order a sandwich by itself for less? You often have to dig for it, tap through extra screens, or specifically ask a human employee if one happens to be working the counter that day. This isn't an accident of bad app design. Bundling has always been a profitable strategy because the add-ons, fries, soft drinks, carry far better profit margins than the core sandwich itself, which is sometimes sold at little to no profit or even at a loss, specifically to get customers in the door. Older paper menus used to make all options, prices, and combinations visible at a glance, partly because that was the only way to communicate at all. Digital menus have no such limitation, but the limitation is the point. A simplified default menu means faster decision-making, faster lines, and a higher chance customers default into the pricier bundle option rather than hunting for the cheapest possible combination. To their credit, when public anger over pricing reached a boiling point, several chains responded, but worth noticing is how they responded. Rather than broadly lowering prices across the menu, companies rolled out narrow, highly visible value promotions, a handful of deeply discounted items, a limited bundle deal, a value menu refreshed every few months. These promotions are real, and they do genuinely help budget-conscious customers find an affordable meal. But they coexist, often within the very same restaurant, with menu items priced at levels that would have seemed absurd a decade earlier. The value meal exists specifically so the company can say, accurately, you can still eat cheaply here, while the rest of the menu drifts upward largely unnoticed. This is the difference between addressing perception and addressing reality. The goal isn't necessarily to make food cheap again. It's to make customers feel like they're still getting a deal, even while the average transaction, when measured over months and years, costs noticeably more than it used to. Executives have said as much publicly, framing the challenge explicitly in terms of customer perception of value, rather than in terms of actual affordability. Perhaps the most uncomfortable trend lurking beneath all of this is the slow, careful introduction of dynamic pricing into an industry that has spent generations selling itself on consistency. A few chains have already tested digital menu systems technically capable of shifting prices throughout the day based on demand, similar to how rideshare apps or airlines price their services. Public backlash to even the suggestion of this has been swift and harsh. Customers do not want to feel like they're being charged differently than the person who ordered 5 minutes earlier. But the underlying technology to make this possible already exists in nearly every major chain's digital infrastructure. The data is being collected. The systems are being built. The only thing currently holding pricing in place hour to hour is public tolerance, not technical limitation. The honest answer is that it's both things at once. Costs really did rise. Labor, beef, packaging, rent, all genuinely more expensive than they were 10 years ago. No company conjured those pressures out of thin air. But cost pressure alone doesn't explain why fast food, specifically, outpaced almost every other category of dining in price growth. The deeper answer is that the largest chains made a series of deliberate strategic choices, shifting toward digital ordering not purely for convenience, but for data collection and personalized upselling, designing default menus to nudge customers toward bundled, higher-margin purchases, treating value promotions as a perception management tool rather than a genuine return to affordability, and quietly building the infrastructure for pricing that could one day shift by the hour. Meanwhile, the rare companies that resisted this transformation, the ones that stuck to simple menus, transparent pricing, and direct ownership of their supply chains rather than chasing every available margin, have shown that staying cheap and consistent was never actually impossible. It was a choice the bigger players decided wasn't worth making anymore. Fast food didn't get expensive purely because the world got more expensive around it. It got expensive because the industry quietly redefined what fast food was for. It stopped being a promise of cheap, reliable food and became something closer to a finely tuned retail platform, one where convenience is real, but so is a constant, careful pressure to get you to spend just a little more than you meant to every single time you order.